believe that your father's been gone for almost 40 years?
I can. It's a lot. Yeah, 86.
Yeah.
I don't feel like he's gone.
Really? Is that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're two people who never really die. You know, they're always kind of there in one way or another. I guess a lot of us are responsible for that in many ways, but also just the show being on and people constantly remembering them all the time. Not very many daughters or sons get that feeling after you lose your parents.
Right. Because people probably still come up to you randomly to talk about
constantly, yeah.
both your parents, obviously.
Yeah, you're lucky if you can look at a photograph, you know, in your house and go, oh, Mom, Dad. I can turn on the TV, you know, and see them live and doing wonderful things and hear their voices, and that's terrific. Everybody should have that.
Yeah. How do you feel about this renewed spotlight on your father with this book?
I'm so grateful that somebody as professional as Todd Purdum wanted to write an in-depth, you know, look at his life, at my dad's life, because it was complicated. He was complicated. The whole story is really complicated, and he's so much a dichotomy. He's all these great, wonderful, genius-y things, and he also had so many problems, and addictions, and things he couldn't control. And he was such a great guy. And people don't seem to ever want to dig beneath the tabloid-esque things that they know about him, you know, and then they know that they were divorced, and they kind of say, oh, because he used to run around with dames and stuff. There's so much more there. His accomplishments were amazing, but also just his personality, his genius, his initiative, his intuition.
Do you think your father has been given the credit that he deserves?
I think he's now, people are seeing that he was tremendously behind the success of not only I Love Lucy, but the Desi Arnaz Studios, and his ability to pick the right people was one of the things he said a long time ago. He said, you know, I may not know how to do this, I may not know how to do that, but I sure can pick people, you know, and he did. He knew how to pick the right people, and then he left them alone to do their job. He didn't nitpick and, you know, like hover over them. And
that requires a kind of confidence to allow people to do what they're good at.
Yeah, I mean, he never thought, I know everything. My father was always the guy who asked why, or, well, why not? He was trying to learn. And if he hadn't done that, there never would have been a 3-camera live audience film technique for I Love Lucy. They just wanted him to go back to New York, you know, and film on tape.
Yeah, that asking of why.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to sound dumb.
Right.
And just ask the question, why? Why are we doing this?
I always wished I had that kind of nerve in school.
Yeah,
you know, to be the one to raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Right.
And he would do that all the time. Yeah, you know, not being afraid to ask questions. Like even his secretary, Johnny A., we used to call him Johnny Aitchison, he was called him Johnny A. Johnny A. would tell me that my father had all of these huge contracts on his desk, you know, and he would have to learn the show, and then he would have to deal with business. How did he do it all? And he would tell Johnny, one wave at a time, you know, like in a boat in Cuba. But sometimes people would come to his office and for this big meeting on this one contract. He didn't have the time always to read 42 pages of the contract. So he was known for looking at the guy and saying, tell me, what in here is, I'll clean it up, what in here is crap for me?
That's the sanitized version.
That's the sanitized version. And it was so, you know, off-putting to people because they would just go, oh, well, page 25 is not so good. You know, like, and they go, okay, good, let's talk about that. Yeah. Instead of pretending for an hour and a half and then finally getting to page 25, you know, he just cut to the chase.
He came up the hard way. Reading about how he grew up from a prominent family in Cuba, and then at 16, 17 years old, to have that all sort of wiped away and end up becoming a refugee in Miami.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you come over here as a refugee, as an exile, not really an immigrant, you know. He did not choose to give up everything and come to this country. He always appreciated this country once he got here. He always credited America with giving him chances that he never could have had as a young man, you know, struggling. But yeah, it was PTSD. It was what happened over there. You know, to watch your home be destroyed and burned to the ground and your animals slaughtered and, you know, everything you own taken away in an instant. That was traumatic. To hear your mother screaming at the top of her lungs, "Mi casa!" You know, It's traumatic. And he talks in his book. My dad wrote an autobiography called A Book years ago, which we're going to put out again next year because it was out of print. And he describes in detail what it was like when he was trying to get from Santiago after that happened to Havana with his mother, hiding in a car, pretending they were the opposition so nobody would attack them, and watching men be dragged through the streets with their heads bouncing on the, sidewalk, and seeing a guy with his head chopped off on a stick in front of his father's house. You never forget that. And you come here and you start again and you're doing comedy and music, but you always have a sense of not belonging here. You belong in Cuba. And you've seen horrible things as if you were in Afghanistan,
And would he talk to you and your brother about that?
No, he would never talk to us about that. I didn't find out a lot about that until way years later, 76, when he wrote his autobiography. I finally heard some of it. But he never got any kind of psychological help for it. They didn't do things like that in those days. So he just kept it all inside. And then on top of it, he had all this creative juice and wonderful personality and terrific sense of humor. So he was able to kind of skate around it. But he took out his anxieties in other ways.
How?
Drinking, women, but not affairs. People say he had affairs. He never had an affair. He didn't even know these dames' names. They were hookers.
So it was transactional.
He adored my mother. He loved my mother. He loved his family. It was a very unique, weird problem to have. And I think that's the reason she stayed with him so long, is that she understood it.
That these weren't affairs of the heart.
They weren't affairs of the heart. I don't think I could do what she did. I think it would still be crazy. But somehow, at the time, with what they had, with what they needed from each other, they stuck it out as long as they could. And I think that when he couldn't quit that, and add to that he started drinking too much with the stresses of the studio, and they always blame it on the studio, but I don't know. It was a combination of the studio and your own world, your mother, who never liked everything you gave her after becoming a huge success, and keeps wanting more, and she's not happy because she's not in Cuba.
And I have to ask, because your grandmother, your father's mother, she sounded like a lot.
She was very interesting because she hardly ever spoke a word. She sat very quietly, very politely, like the grande dame that she was. And everybody thought she was like a queen, she's the sweetest woman in the world.
Una reina.
La reina. But she was very unforgiving, and she never gave him the acceptance that all kids want from their parents. You want your mom and your dad to say, "You did good."
And she wouldn't do that.
She never did that. I don't know if she just purposely didn't, or she's just not educated and she didn't have the smarts. But she didn't. And his father was the mayor of Santiago. He was a big mucky-muck doctor. He was a big guy in the Machado administration. And then they lost everything, and they're penniless, killing rats in a warehouse with a bat, all of a sudden. And then my father makes it in music, and then he makes it in Hollywood, and I think his own father never forgave him.
He was jealous of your father?
I think he was very jealous.
So did either of his parents give him unconditional love?
I don't think they ever did. I don't think they ever really gave him what we know to be unconditional love now, that we just love you, you're doing a great job, I love you, you're spectacular. My feeling, and I wasn't as close to his dad, he only came to visit us like 3 times in our whole life. I was born, he never even came out of Florida to visit his first grandchild. Yeah. When his first grandson, another Desiderio, was born, 2 years later he came out to see the kid. What's that about?
Right.
Oh, he was busy. What? My father's this huge mucky-muck guy in show business, and his father's still trying to be the mayor.
Right, trying to be the head of the family.
Yeah, so right. I think that all contributed to the problems that my dad had when he wasn't being a genius and inventing amazing things for television. Right. So that's what makes him so complicated,
What is your earliest memory of your father?
What's my earliest memory? Oh, gosh. They were working a lot, so they weren't home often. But I remember being in the pool with him a lot and playing with him, because when he was home, he really loved being there, and he had great presence with children. he loved to play. My mother, I think because she was a woman and it was the 50s and you weren't supposed to be working, you were supposed to be home, being a mother. And that she would always be more concerned with, did the dishes get done? Did the kids get their bath, And my father was like, I don't care, I got 20 minutes, I'm going to play,
And what was the play like?
In the pool or music. He would bring out the guitar, bring out little drums, teach us a little tiny bit of Spanish, very little, very, very little.
Vocal.
Just be with you, take you out by the hand and show you the sunset and say, look at that, that's God's handiwork. He loved nature, he loved music, he was fun.
Was he affectionate?
He was very affectionate, yes, very affectionate.
And I know Todd writes that your mother loved the way he smelled. What did he smell like?
I love that she said that.
Yeah.
She loved the way he smelled. I don't remember him smelling. I know he used that kind of cologne that was called, like, well, you tell me, you're a man, 8711 or something like that. It had numbers on the front. It was a little green bottle. 5711, does that sound like it? Yeah. Never mind. Yeah. I don't know what he smelled. He smelled like cigars to me most of the time. That's what he smelled like.
And would he sing? And that's interesting. I was going to ask, did he sing around the house?
He sang around the house all the time. He sang all day, every day, while he cooked.
In Spanish?
In Spanish, sometimes in English. His music was his life. It was his bloodline.
But he came to it sort of later. So that's why I was curious how serious he was about it, or?
No, he didn't really come to it later. He grew up playing the guitar. He learned how to play the guitar in Cuba. Yeah. He used it because you had to serenade the ladies. That's how you got the girls. Right. So he had learned how to play the guitar from one of his cousins or his uncle. And when he came over to Miami and he was cleaning bird cages for a living, and that wasn't going far, he finally made enough money doing that he could buy another little guitar, because his guitar was smashed and burned in the Revolution. He bought another little guitar, a little cheap guitar with like palm trees and hula girls on it, and learned how to play. And again, Miami, those beach nights with the music and the broads and the barbecues and stuff. And he got his first job at the Roni Plaza playing in a band. Yeah. And that was it. And it went on from there. Then Cugat and Hollywood and the Desi Arnaz Orchestra. And he always was focused on music.
And when you remember him singing, do you remember, can you even remember what he might have been singing around the house? Or?
No, I don't really remember a specific song that he sang, because he just loved music. And I mean, the obvious things that we remember from his shows and things, Cuban Pete. You know, he tried to teach us the Straw Hat song a couple of times.
What's the Straw Hat song?
Whenever old man trouble makes trouble arise, just move that big straw hat over your eyes. You remember that? And that was adorable. And we did. We learned how to sing a lot of his stuff. And he taught Desi how to play the drums when he was little. He had a little tiny drum, like kid-size drum for Des. And that, I'm sure that's where my love of music comes from, is you grow up with it and you appreciate it and you see somebody who loves it that much.
Do you remember when Desi came home, when your brother came home?
You mean from the hospital?
Yeah.
No, I was only a year and a half, 18.
Oh, you were a year and a half.
I have pictures of it. I can see me going, who's this now? Really? How long does he stay?
But ultimately, did it make the house more fun? And
there's only two of us, and we're at home alone most of the time with a really great nanny. They were working all the time, and Desi, to my horror, was a very cute, adorable, talented kid who could play the drums, and he was a musician too, who played the guitar. And at that age, I couldn't do anything. I thought, what am I going to do? Everybody can do something but me.
You know, it's funny because my mother is Colombian, and my brothers and I affectionately would make fun of her accent growing up. Would you and your brother make fun of your father's accent?
You know what's funny? We never did make fun of his accent. I don't think I ever made fun of his accent.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, because he certainly had an accent. He never really lost that. That was not fake, that Ricky Ricardo sound.
It was pretty accurate. It's pretty much what he sounded like off camera.
But my mother never made fun of it in real life. No.
Not even affectionately.
No, because he was the only person in the house that spoke two languages. We had tremendous respect for that, and I wish more people would do that. Yeah. Because, there's a lot of people in this country speaking with accents.
Right.
And they learned how to speak English, didn't they? Do you know how to speak their language? No.
Yeah.
Right? And so we always had tremendous respect for the fact that he could speak and, live life and run studios in his second language, not his, first language, and he did it well. He was self-taught too. He never got a chance to go to college. He finished high school barely in Miami, but he was self-taught. He read everything. He was a voracious reader.
Is it right he was a big admirer of Lincoln?
Loved Abraham Lincoln, collected Lincoln original things. Really? A lot of them, we still have a lot of them down in our house in Baja. Books and plaques that he would have, framed and whatnot.
And what do you think that was about?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah,
he just really loved the man. He liked what he stood for, I think.
And he was, it sounds like your father was very patriotic, really loved the country.
He was very patriotic. He was a Republican back in the 70s, and he was very patriotic, and he always voted, and he always was very grateful. He couldn't wait to be given his citizenship papers.
Oh, I should know this. When did that happen? When did he become
in the mid-40s, right around World War II. He wanted to enlist, but you couldn't. You could be drafted, but you couldn't enlist or something like that. It was weird if you weren't a citizen, so he had to wait until his citizenship papers came through. And he wanted to go to bombardier school. Yeah. And then just before he got in, they were playing football right in front of the barracks, and he busted his knee. Ooh. So he was out for like 3 months, and it never really recuperated enough for them to put him in. So what's funny is he wanted to go to bombardier school. He hurts his knee. Then they say, okay, no, you're in the infantry in the Army instead. I'm sorry, what? Like, I hurt my knee. How can I be in the infantry?
Well, since your knee's already busted.
Yeah, right? We'll just have you limp.
Right.
The old.
What do you remember about your trips to the set?
I remember very little about the I Love Lucy show set, except we would go from time to time. We would be asked to come down on the show nights, Thursday nights, and we would sit in the bleachers. And I remember being introduced. My dad always did the warm-up and told a couple of funny jokes, and the band played, and my brother and I would go and get all dressed up. And he would first introduce Desi, and Desi would stand up like the perfect little gentleman that he was and take one of those great little boy bows,
right,
like this. Sure. And while he was doing that, I was crawling under the bleachers.
Because you were...
So shy. Right. So shy, it was sickening. I just did not want to be known as that person. Here's my daughter. And I was, what I think it was? I didn't understand why they were applauding for me. It's like, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Yeah. Why are you making all this noise?
Other kids didn't have that responsibility or get that applause.
It bothered me. I didn't like it. I like it now. I did not like it. And so I literally crawled under the bleachers, and he would say, my daughter, Lucy. And he would look around and there would be nobody there.
And did you get the sense that they were working very hard? Because it must have required such discipline to do that show at that level for 10 years.
They worked extraordinarily hard. And plus, as I said, they were inventing it all as they went along. So they didn't have a set rehearsal schedule in the very beginning. Sometimes they would be there from early in the morning until 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And I was born 6 weeks before the first show started filming. So you can imagine how many years, those are all those years where I didn't really get a chance to see them during the day and find out, didn't have that bonding experience. And great people took care of us, by the way. We didn't,
your grandmother on your mother's side.
Yeah, my grandmother Dee Dee took care of us, and we had a terrific nanny, Willie Mae. And I have no complaints about the people around us. We were very well cared for. But you still don't have that bonding thing with your parents. You don't get to know them that way,
Right. So it took until later for that, right?
It never really happens. If you miss those early years, it happens in a different way later on. Your friends, you know them as adults or teenagers, or they're sort of your, they're always your principal, the person who says, you have to do this and you have to do that. It's like going to the principal's office. Like they're the ones who lay out your day and they say yes or no. But the rest of it, the fun stuff, the sitting around doing nothing together, let's go shopping, let's go to the market, let's just drive around, that most people take for granted, that you do with your folks and bores you to death. We didn't have any of that. So something doesn't register, So then when you have your own kids, you have to sort of start from scratch and go, I have no sense memory of this. How do I do this? So
with your own kids, did you kind of make sure to give them what you felt like you hadn't gotten?
I tried. I actually put out a whole CD from a lecture I used to give called Surviving Success, which was about exactly that, about thinking Not that it was their fault, but we didn't get a whole lot of time with our parents. And so when I have my family, and I'm also married to an actor, so we're going to be busy working, doing our shows, but we are going to be there for those kids. And I was there in the morning, and I took them to school, and I bought their school shoes, and all those things my mother could never do. You ask my kids today, and they'll say things without even realizing it, and they were talking to you, and they go, well, Mom wasn't home a lot, so that's what they'll say. Because I was an actress, and because sometimes I worked in a TV show, and I was gone in the morning, or I was in a Broadway show, and I was gone at night. Their memory is that I wasn't there a lot.
It's all relative, though.
I tried.
Compared, probably
yes,
compared.
And what it all came down to, and you may not even use this part, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I finally had to go talk to a child psychologist because one of my kids was acting out in school. And that's never good when they tell you got to go meet with a school psychologist. But he asked me one specific question. He said, how much time do you actually spend with your kids every day? And that was the worst thing he could have said to me. I wanted to kill him because I was trying so hard not to have my kids grow up like I did. And I start listing all the things that I do with my kids. And then he said, okay, that's great, fantastic. And you have 5 children. And I said, yes, I have 3 of my own, I have 2 stepchildren, and we have to da-da-da-da-da. And he said, well, good, could you say that you spend 15 minutes alone with each kid every day? And I went, what are you kidding, 15 minutes? That's like, what? Of course, that's, with each kid? Every day? And he said, well, that's what makes them feel worthy of love. Wow. So I realized that as hard as I was trying, I wasn't trying in the right way, You didn't have to be with them all the time. 15 minutes or even 10, he said, they get bored after that. Really. It's like if you can focus on each kid alone, and you're not driving at the time, you're not cooking at the time, you are going, hey, how was today? How do you feel? That makes all the difference. And I wasn't really doing that, and I know my parents didn't do that. Oh my God, they had no idea about that.
Did either of your parents ever express any regret about the time they didn't spend with you and your brother growing up?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that occurred to them. I think that they would tell you, if they were here, and I know they are, I think they would tell you that they did the best they could with where they were, with what they had, a la Teddy Roosevelt. And I believe that's true. I absolutely believe that's true. Yeah. When I did the Lucie Desi home movie documentary in '93, the reason I did that was to find out who I am because of who they were. How did I become me? How did I grow up to be this person? How did I grow up to be this kind of mother? And I figured it out, and I went, wow, okay. If I walked in their shoes through the same roads that they did with everything that happened to them and all the choices that they had and the crossroads and the choices they made and the ways they went, and then I was faced with this, what would I have done? Would I have made a different decision? Would I have not done that? Would I have gone home and stopped the show? No, I would have done exactly what they did. So it was very helpful to walk a mile in their shoes, as people say,
When they decided to split up, did they sit you and your brother down?
Yeah, they did. They sat us down just like Cher's song, you better sit down, kids. It was exactly like that. We were here in Palm Springs, at their house in Palm Springs, and I remember that vividly, which is interesting because you don't remember everything about your childhood, but I do remember that night, and so does my brother, and he was 18 months younger, that they said that we love each other, but the being husband and wife part is broken, and we can't live together anymore. And so we're going to live apart, but you'll still see your dad and you'll still see me. And I remember that my brother said, but if it's broken, can't you just fix it? Can't you put stuff on it and fix it? And they said, I don't think so. So I do remember that vividly. And I remember that it was really hard for them to tell us that too. Because once you tell your kids, it's like it makes it real.
Did it take a while to absorb? Did you think it was real? Did you think it was final?
Apparently I did not think it was final, because even after my mother was married to Gary Morton, I was still making her watch The Parent Trap with Haley Mills, hoping that she and my father would get back together again. I always thought that it was too fast that she got married again. I thought she should have thought about that a little longer. Kids always think there's a possibility there are folks that could get back together again somehow. You want that. But the truth of it is, Mo, They were happier after they got divorced. The screaming and the arguing and all that stuff stopped.
Was that a relief that
Yeah,
there was no
of
more
course.
acrimony? And
Oh my gosh, it's so hard for kids when you hear the two people you love the most, taking it on with each other, going at each other like that. It's hard. It's terrible. You don't want that. So you don't want them to get divorced. You don't know what divorce is. But you say, oh, they're going to be gone. He's not going to be here anymore. Or, so, what does that mean? Where am I going to be? Who do I live with? It's terrorizing. But then once you get into it, if it's done right, and they did it right, which is, I'm so grateful for, that is the best thing I can say, is that once they decided to separate, they did it so amicably. They had one lawyer, Mickey Rudin, and he made sure that my mother was taken care of properly and that she had whatever she needed for the kids. And even though she had a lot more money, I'm sure, and she could have done a lot more with her career than my dad possibly, he still did it as if she was a nobody, and he was going to take care of her with alimony and child support and all that stuff. And then they were friendly from then on.
yeah.
They never had another argument that I could ever remember.
And to hear your parents arguing is horrible.
It is horrible to hear them arguing.
Was there a pattern to it, even at that young age? Could you think, uh-oh, this is going to turn into this, is going to turn into that, and there's going to be screaming and door slamming?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And, my mother had a temper. She was like Irish, French, crazy redhead temper. And you'd think my father with the Cuban would be the worst of it, but she really had a terrible temper. And when she decided to get angry, she could really blow, and doors would slam, craziness would happen, and it was terrifying. So you don't want that anymore. Let that just be gone. So when it was gone, it was like, oh, okay, well, at least there's that.
And when you were told, did you sort of instinctively become protective of your little brother? I mean, or did you take comfort in each other, or did you just sort of process it alone? Or?
I wish you'd been my therapist growing up. These are good questions. I'd like to say I was protective of my little brother. I don't think I was all that protective of him. Oddly enough, as a kid, it's like everybody for himself. We weren't that far apart in ages. And I think mostly I sort of was very protective of my dad, believe it or not. I felt really sorry for my dad.
Even at that young age?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I think because I felt like he was the one that got ousted. We were still in the house. He had to leave, so maybe there's that.
Yeah.
And I felt like he got a lot of the blame. Even though I didn't understand the blame, I was too young to understand what it was all about. I didn't know, really. I knew that he had problems. I knew that he would, drink sometimes, but that really became worse when I was older, when I was like a teenager. But I felt bad for him. And I remember when she told me she was going to get married again to Gary Morton, and I was on the phone with him, and he was being very brave and very positive and saying, honey, you got to give her support and you be nice to him, and he loves your mother. He was trying. And I was like, I'm never going to love him. I don't care what, I felt so bad for my father.
Do you think it made it, I'm wondering about the age difference, his being 6 years younger. Do you think that played into the dynamic of their marriage at all?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Right,
She was a little bit older, yeah, and I think it was more their extreme, different kinds of
cultural
backgrounds and growing up.
Yeah.
Just as much as that was attractive in the beginning, it very possibly was the thing that she just couldn't wrap her head around later on. He was who he was, and he wasn't that changeable, almost never. But then later on, way later on, almost when it was too late, he really made some amazing progress on himself. And, he committed to AA meetings, and, he went through treatment program and got sober.
For the last year of his life.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was like my greatest memory of him to this day is him standing up when I went there for Family Week. My brother and I were there, and a couple of other people. And every day, he'd get up at those meetings. This was in La Jolla, and to have him, the guy who said, I don't air my laundry in front of, my dirty laundry in front of other people. I don't air my dirty laundry in front of other people. And he didn't even show up when Desi went through recovery his time. He didn't go because he doesn't do that. And then when he finally made his decision after his wife, Edie, darling, wonderful Edie, died, he said, I can't do this anymore. And he asked my brother to help him. And they went to this Scripps place together. And he got up and said, "My name is Desi and I'm an alcoholic." And that's my proudest moment, that he stood up next to me and I watched him do that, to take responsibility and to try to solve it. It's a disease, and he finally wrapped his head around that, and I was so very proud of him. Unfortunately, it happened about 3 years too late, because by that time he figured out about a month later that he had lung cancer. And he didn't go to the AA meetings. He was sick and on morphine, and it was bad, and he only lasted a year.
But boy, you were there at that meeting.
I was so proud of him. It doesn't matter when you get there, as long as you get there. Every day you wake up again and check out and say, "Hey, what do I need to do today?" And if you see that yesterday sucked, then you change today and you make it better. As long as you wake up and you see these things, I think that's all life is really about.
Yeah. Who was funnier around the house?
It's funny. I always say to people, my mother was not funny. She wasn't a comedian, like doing funny shtick all the time.
She wasn't a joke teller.
She was not a joke teller. My father actually had a better sense of humor. My father was, if he sat here with you, he would just make you laugh through the whole thing. He had a good way of looking at things, and he always thought funny. My mother didn't think funny, but she could do funny. She was funny when she was retelling a story. Just when she said, like, "You can't believe it just happened to me when I got out of my car," and she would reenact, because she's acting, right? And then you would fall down laughing, because she would physically reenact something and make you laugh. But she wasn't a joke teller. She didn't see life as funny. Again, she was one of those people who was, I felt like she was always trying to catch up. Like, I'm late. I have to do this. I got to do that. I got to get back. I got to do this. I haven't got time for that. I felt like she was running late all the time.
That's so interesting. Well, because she was so responsible from such an early age.
That's why.
And the thing from this book that I think is so remarkable, this is much more about your mother than your father, is that the clowning that she learns from Buster Keaton, I mean, she's taught fairly late. Mm-hmm. It's not like she was, right. Sammy Davis Jr. traveling,
no.
at the age of 7 and 8, learning comedy.
But like my dad, that's one thing they had in common. She loved learning. She loved to learn, and she was always eager to teach me how to do that. How do you do that? And so she developed mentors through the years: Charles Lawton, Buster Keaton, Ed Sedgwick, who directed a lot of Keaton's films, and people who would train her. She watched, if you read her book, when she was a model, Lillian Gish came into the modeling agency and was bored while they were picking costumes for her, for clothes for her. And so she tore off little pieces of white paper and stuck them all over her face to look like she had freckles or something. And then she'd just sit there, like stone-faced, and people would scream with laughter. So when my mother did Roman Scandals and she was trying to get Eddie Cantor's attention to, like, pick her for a special bit, she did the same thing. She picked off crepe paper from something on a table and put these little dots all over her face so that he would say, "Who's that ball dame?" So
lifelong learner, always about self-improvement, very methodical, it sounds like.
Yeah, very true, right. And she didn't get a chance to be a kid. Her mother had to go to work when she was like 4 because her father had died. And now she's alone. Mother had to go back to work. And so, again, like me, she was alone at home all day. And she ended up doing all the work. So she didn't get to just play and be a kid. So isn't it funny? Her biggest success is playing a character where she's basically baby Schnooks. She's a kid getting into trouble.
Yeah. And I know you already alluded to it, but when you now look back at your father's life, the trauma of what happened in Cuba, can you see how it might have affected him throughout his life?
Absolutely. I think everything that happened to him as a kid is what helped him succeed. It gave him the drive and the tenaciousness to make it work. When you have nothing and you have to get it again, you try all kinds of things. So he wasn't afraid to try things that hadn't been done before, but it also was his nemesis, that PTSD, that trauma as a kid. And my mother had it too. My mother had a different kind of trauma. Neither one of them had trauma that was inflicted on purpose. Yeah. Not from their parents, not from really, it was a revolution. And my mother had lots of death in her family and accidents with the gun accidents and poverty and stuff. All of that, that's why family history is so amazing.
Yeah, yeah. At what point did you all realize, oh, our parents are Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, as in Lucy and Ricky Ricardo?
That is like the question everybody asks.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it is. You're fascinated, like, when does it hit you that, oh my God, it's so gradual because you grow up. I grew up in it, right? The minute I was born, it was happening. My first recollection of anything, they were already Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. And same with Desi. So I don't have any memory of it not being like that. It's just this is who these people are. It was probably for me when I was in grammar school and there was a father-daughter dance and he couldn't go because he was too busy doing that. And I mean, he really wanted to go.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh my God, he was really wanted to go. But for some reason, it was show night, who knows what it was. He couldn't go. And my Uncle Kenny took me. And I remember thinking, well, that's funny. And my mother couldn't really come to the shows to see our little pageants in the afternoon because that's when they were rehearsing. So I didn't have this sense that, oh, there are these big famous people. But I had the sense that they're not regular.
Got it.
They're not regular parents. Yeah. My other girlfriends have parents that are here, So then you start going, oh, and you don't, like I said before, you don't get a chance to go shopping with them or, and then when you go have dinner someplace, people come up to them all the time and they want them to put their signature on stuff. And it's like, well, that's why.
Right.
But as a little kid, I had my favorites. I liked Red Skelton, and I like, there were people I wanted to meet too. So I guess I kind of figured out it's like that.
Did Jimmy Durante ever sing Inka Dinka Doo to you?
Jimmy Durante sang everything Jimmy Durante ever sang to me and to us. He was one of my favorite people on the planet.
Oh, I mean...
Generous to a fault, so dear, so funny. There's only like two amazing, never mad at anybody, perfect people that were ever born, I think. Jimmy Durante and maybe...
Eddie Cantor?
No, I don't know about Eddie Cantor.
Okay.
Gail Gordon, maybe, who worked with my mother for so many years. Yeah. Gail Gordon, one of the nicest, kindest, most talented people in the world. No one's ever said a bad word about Gail Gordon, and no one has ever said a bad word about Jimmy Durante.
Right, yeah. Is he Mrs. Ricardo?
Ricardo. He was Mr. Mooney. He was Uncle Harry. He was
so
all
good.
those people.
The whole thing that they needed to do the show in L.A., and that led to the filming and to the invention of reruns and all these innovations, they could have done the show together in New York. But is it just that they were so attached to Los Angeles at that point as a family?
How about that? Talk about things happening the way they were supposed to happen.
Yeah.
They could have easily, like everybody else, oh, we've got a series? That's fantastic. Where do we go? What do we have to do? You come to New York. Great. No. She wanted to, she was pregnant, first of all, and they had a beautiful little ranchito in California, and they had a plan. They had family out there, and it was like, wait, what? We didn't say we were going to New York. And they went, yeah, I know, but you have to. Otherwise, these people only get kinescope, and that sucks. You got to come here so we can film it the right way. Why don't we? And only because of that did my father have the presence of mind to say, well, why? Why can't we do it here? And they said, because Lucy works best in front of an audience, and you can't put an audience with film because you need a studio, and you can't bring audience into a studio. Well, why can't we figure out how to do it on film here so you'll get better quality there, but we bring an audience in, we'll figure out how to do it. Do you know how to do that? Sure. He didn't have a clue. So he had to figure that out. And because he figured it out, with help, with these great people, he knew how to pick reruns, syndication. We have the kind of world we have today in television because they invented that.
And because he kept saying, ¿por qué, por qué, por qué?
Why? ¿Por qué no?
And it is amazing because for all the amount of work that it took, right, to create to do that show, produce it for 10 seasons, it was ultimately, it sounds like, a family first decision to do it in Los Angeles.
Absolutely. Everything was about the family. It was always about, no, we have a plan. This is why I got off the road. This is why I'm not doing my shows. This is why she stopped doing movies. We want to be together. We want to be in California. We want to do this. Which is crazy when you're nobody. He wasn't a big star. She wasn't a huge star. She was a decent star of, B pictures. And that they would put their foot down like that and say, well, no, we don't want to do that. It's crazy.
At your birthday parties, did you ever do the conga?
Now I do. No, I didn't do congas at my birthday parties. No, I don't remember. We had great birthday parties growing up, though, because especially when they owned the studio, because we could say, we want to have a carnival. And instead of, just getting like fake little things, a carnival would show up in your backyard. Can I tell you, with, like Ferris wheels and things. And one day I said, I want it to be like a town and little banks and a grocery store and props. And it was really good to be, the son and daughter of somebody who owned a big movie studio.
I was about to say, did you have an Untouchables themed prom?
No, the Untouchables didn't happen until
Till
after
later.
that, right? Yeah, no. But when you're a kid and you can go up in the prop department at RKO, and because they didn't even, no, then it was Desi Lou. The prop department at Desi Lou had a life-size, like the real size, King Kong, which we could play with. Things like that. It was fun.
Very fun. I love King Kong. So was your father a big cook?
My father was a great cook.
Yeah.
When he got a chance to cook, he didn't have a lot of time, but on the weekends, unlike my mom, who just never went in the kitchen, my father loved to cook, and he never used a recipe. He just cooked off of the top of his head, so it was impossible to learn what he was doing. I'm still trying to figure out how to make Arnaz rice. Please, if anybody knows how to make Arnaz rice. Anybody still alive? It was the best rice I ever had in my life.
And he was probably self-taught.
He was totally self-taught because he was in a house full of servants too as a
Exactly,
kid.
right, yeah.
No, he instinctively knew that. Loved to cook. He made all kinds of Cuban dishes, but he also made great, American dishes and whatnot. And yeah, fantastic cook. Always.
And did he have, independent of your mom, or were most of their friends sort of couples that were friends with other couples, or did he have his own pals?
Most of the people that they hung out with had some relationship to the movie industry or their show, but they hung out with a lot of family, I have to say. Yeah. When they had time to hang out, it was with her mother, his mother, us, Ebba Sedgwick, who was Ed Sedgwick's wife and became like family. Mary Wicks,
Mary Wicks.
Mary Wicks
is great.
My mother had very, regular pals.
Yeah.
She didn't have a lot of showbiz friends, and neither did he. He hung out with the guys who liked the track, like Jimmy Durante and Burt Bacharach and those guys at the beach.
Oh, he hung out with Burt Bacharach?
Well, Burt loved the races, and my father lived at Del Mar for most of his life. He lived at the ranch, at the Corona breeding farm that he started, and then he would spend summers in Del Mar, which we fell in love with Del Mar early on. And whoever came down there, and it was Burt Bacharach or, and Jimmy lived right next door. It was funny because Jimmy lived next door when we lived at the other end of the beach, and then when he moved to this side, Jimmy lived next door again.
And I could have been sitting across from Susan Arnaz.
Susan Arnaz?
Well, that was going to be your name, right?
Oh! I could have been sitting across, and I'm going, wait, you could have been sitting across. Susan Arnaz,
Yeah.
yes.
No, she's not some lady who blew us off.
I don't know who that is. Susan, yes, I was supposed to be Susan.
It is interesting, though. What does that say, that your mother had planned on that, and then she wakes up and is told, here she is, Lucy.
Shows you who's in charge of that house. My father wanted to name me after my mother, and he just waited till she nodded off and put Lucie on the birth certificate. He said to me, so nobody ever got confused, like they would. She had a friend who was in a wheelchair and didn't live much longer than after I was born. Her name was Susan, and I'm going to forget her last name.
Yeah.
She was an actress, and she was Susan Peters, maybe? Anyway, she wanted to name me after her because she loved her, and she knew that she wasn't long for the world. And so that was her plan, Susan. Good name. My best girlfriend growing up was Susie, so it would have been fine with that.
But it's interesting, though, that your father, marriages are complicated, but that he basically was like, no, she'll be under, and then this is what I'm going to name her.
Yeah, well, I guess you get your way when people are asleep. I don't know.
Right.
I don't think he thought she cared that much.
Okay.
She just wanted a healthy baby at that point after trying for so many years. And he did it as a tribute to my mother. So you had to take that as a compliment.
And you and your brother kind of came in under the wire.
Oh, yeah. My mother was 40 when she had me.
Yeah.
And that's in the 1950s. So that was crazy. And then 2 years later, 18 months later, to have another child. That's wild.
The book really underlines this. And it is striking that this TV series would be created to help save a family. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, this TV show, which inspired so many families, ends with, your parents getting divorced. But I guess what I'm wondering is, did the TV show at least keep the marriage together for longer?
I'm sure that it kept the marriage together in one form or fashion because they were working together on the set. And when they were on the set together, it was heaven. It was Camelot. Nobody's gotten that right yet, you know? It was beautiful on the set. Maybe the last couple weeks when they knew things were going to go to hell. But before that, they were always happy on the set, and they would tell you that. She said that many, many times. That was their absolute bliss. Sometimes what happened off the set, not so much. But I think they stuck it out as long as they did because they didn't want to quit. It was so good.
So, I mean, it makes me wonder that the TV show didn't just succeed as a TV show. It did, in a sense, succeed in what it was meant to do, to keep the family together.
Well, it was I say it in the end of the documentary, but the last thing I said in my Lucy Desi home movie documentary was it's weird because they went about this for all the right reasons, to keep their marriage together and to have a family. And, you know, they had the family, and then the show happened, and the whole world got this fantastic show, and what I said was it took off like gangbusters. It sure did. Like it explodes, and it's be careful what you wish for kind of success. And they never got what they wanted, which was to have this happen so they could stay together. It actually ended up blowing them apart.
You think so?
Yes, because it was the show, and it was, if you read Todd's book, if you read my father's book, it was the show, and then the show was so successful that it led to more, let's produce a couple more. People want me to produce their shows. And then, now we're producing shows. We got to get bigger because the studios are coming into this, so we better get bigger and maybe we'll become a studio. So they become a studio. And now that's so big that there's so much stress and so little time for their marriage, for their family to be home, that it becomes this, volcano, and it explodes.
But had the show never happened...
Had the show never happened, who knows? She was pregnant with me. She'd have had a kid and maybe another kid, and she'd have kept doing B movies, and he'd have been on the road, or maybe he'd stay home and work in a radio show. Who knows what would happen? The show happened is all I know. I can't figure out what would happen if it didn't happen. We wouldn't have I Love Lucy, and who knows? It was all meant to go the way it went.
Yeah, boy.
It was all meant to go the way it went.
Yeah.